Hey everybody, Jen Hatmaker here, host of the For the Love podcast. We've got a barn burner today. Welcome to the show. I'm sure you've seen the title of this episode, but we've got a powerhouse in today's episode. So right now, you guys, we are deep in our Embracing Change series. The whole team was like really excited about this series, um, especially when we got this guy to say yes, that he would come on the show. This is an author and a speaker. He's done deep, deep, deep work, far reaching work about how we can create a life that literally sets us up well to face change, not only just to embrace changes we didn't see coming, but really to get out in front of it, to be the ones who are creating change that has like a major and meaningful impact on the whole rest of our lives. His book is probably one of the most, if not the most, popularly recommended books in the last several years for people who want to make meaningful change, people who want to cultivate habits that they feel proud of, that move them toward being the person they want to be, to free themselves from everything that is holding them back. So, of course, I am talking about Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. And so obviously we've got the one and only James Clear on the show today, you guys. The thing is sometimes everything around change feels hard, right? It seems hard and we don't know where to start, or we don't know what to do, or we have false started before, or the thing that we are aiming for feels too far away. And so I get all that. Those are all my hangups, all the reasons for me to like off ramp off any like meaningful moment of change in my own life. So I am personally enraptured with people who can break down a concept and serve it back to us in a different, non-overwhelming way. Do you know what I mean? My one thing I've said before about myself that I know about myself, I have a tendency toward overwhelm, particularly when an idea is front loaded to me. Like, here's this big idea, and then it's just too big, and I cannot figure out how to eat the elephant a bite at a time. And I am easily overwhelmed. So, Atomic Habits has been an absolute game changer for when I can't even just say so many people, millions and millions and millions of people, finally sort of building the life that they want through teeny tiny changes. In fact, the book announces on the cover, tiny changes, remarkable results. And it really is that simple. I talked to James today, not only about like what his book has meant to me, but you're just going to have to listen in. But I'm like, first of all, James, you and I are starting with beef. And so I brought to him my grievances, the airing of the grievances. And so you'll hear that right out of the gate. But also you're going to be just excited to hear from him. Like, he is just vibrant. This material is imprinted on his DNA at this point, and he still speaks of it in such like vivacious and vibrant and fresh ways. In fact, we're at the very end of the thing and I'm wrapping up the interview and he's like, wait, I have something else I want to say. I'm like, bro, bring it. That's why you're here. Like, what else do you want to say? We want to hear it. So I think you're going to love this conversation. I'm not going to steal the thunder from this interview because it's packed, but the highest level idea for you, if you're like, I'm about to listen to this, is that James helps us look at the cumulative impact of a life made up of our choices and what happens when we make teeny tiny changes. He invites us to consider, what if we postured ourselves and took steps toward that space 1% at a time? Just this tiny, minuscule little increment. But if you are good at math, 1% adds up. that adds up fairly quickly. And before you know it, you're 20% down the road, you're 45% down the road, you're 70% down the road. And none of that was overwhelming because it's a little tiny step at a time. As he says, it gets us to where we want to be by following the curve of tiny habits as they compound for you. This is a fresh idea on habits. James said in our interview, he's like, I'm not the first person to write about habits and I won't be the last. And like I told him, that is true. But you have brought us original ideas around this that are for the normal person, the regular, ordinary person who can be very overwhelmed, very daunted by this big, huge end game goal. But in his approach, 1% is not daunting at all. One tiny little moment at a time is not daunting at all. So I think my favorite part of this conversation is how he tells us that change comes when we actually unlearn how our identity is formed and what we believe ourselves, and that the story that we can learn to start telling ourselves will be ultimately what changes us. It's not like the thing, it's not the goal, it's not the accomplishment. It's this story that we begin to tell ourselves 1% at a time. And that is what changes. It's so good. First of all, James has been writing about this stuff for years over at jamesclear.com since like 2012. And just no big deal. But Atomic Habits has sold more than 15 million copies worldwide and has been translated into more than 50 languages. I mean, you don't have to be in publishing to know, like, that is outrageous, very rare. And I told him this too, but I'm like, your marketing team and your publishing team, they can release a book to some degree of hype. But at the 15 million mark, that book continues to sell because it has mattered to people and they are telling other people. That's the only formula here. Atomic Habits has changed so many people's lives that they end up telling their daughter and their mom and their best friend and their work friend, you literally have to read this book. And thus it goes. So buckle up, you guys, because James is here to tell you that you can decide who you want to be. And like he says, meaningful change doesn't have to be radical change. The best. Okay, I loved it. Loved this conversation. Used every single minute of our time. So please welcome the amazing, the smart, the gifted, the insightful James Clear. Well, James, I guess we all know who you are. And so welcome to the show. I'm delighted to meet you.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, pleasure to talk and appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, we're going to start with beef I have with you. Let's go there. Let's start there. Because you just had to go and write a book that will not budge off the New York Times bestsellers list. Happened to be in my category, just happens to be in my category and all my friends' categories, the categories that we write in, which turns out to be the very random catch-all miscellaneous category on the Times list. And guess who we just cannot knock off to save our living lives? It's you, James, you. You got that top spot for eternity. So every time one of us comes out with a book, we'll all text each other and we're like, guys, listen, we're just going for the number 2 spot. That's it. And that's where we all land.
Tell you what, don't blame me, blame the readers. I haven't bought a copy, so that's good.
That's so true. That's so true. Well, it's working, isn't it? This book of yours.
Yeah, it has been a wild ride. It has been a wild ride. Tomic Habits came out 5 years ago, and I think certainly it's outpaced my expectations, any reasonable expectation you could have.
Of course. Who in the entire world can imagine this many millions of copies sold in all these languages and just really like the steadiest readership for this long? I mean, I don't know what you expected, but this has got to be above it.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, there are many reasons to write. Like you could write in a diary or a journal or whatever, but the reasons that people write books is they hope to be read. You know, they hope to reach people. And That's been the best part of it, is seeing or finding it useful and feeling like, I'm not the first person to write about habits, and I won't be the last person. Just kind of adding my little bit to the pile. But it's nice to feel like it's making an impact for people and they're finding it useful. And yeah, I just wanted to feel like I could contribute something, and it feels good to do that.
The numbers don't lie because your publishing team and your publicist and your marketing folks, they can get you a certain ways. They can get you a few miles down the road with a book release. But at this point, at this level, your book continues to just live in the stratosphere because it's helping people. That's why. It's because people read it and they're recommending it. So this is way outside your purview at this point.
Yeah, I
It
think
has
we can
created its
debate
own
what the
life.
numbers are. I think there's some number, and it depends on the size of your audience, but maybe it's 25,000 copies, maybe it's 100,000 copies. I don't know. Some number that you could move just by having a large audience and trying to work a bunch of interviews. But I think certainly once you get into the millions of copies, the only way that a book gets there is word of mouth. And so it kind of, it's not that marketing isn't important. It's just that every marketing strategy is easier when you have great content or a great product. And so it all boils down to, is this as useful as it could be? Is this as valuable as it could be? Are you actually genuinely helping people? And, people aren't going to share or recommend a book that they didn't genuinely like or really find useful. And that's kind of my guiding light, is to try to create things that are genuinely valuable and practical and actionable. And yeah, when you do it well, the readers will share it with others.
That's right. And yes, you're right. You're not the first person to write on habits, nor will you be the last, but you do write with a specific perspective. And in a lot of ways, your advice and your leadership, it has a unique flavor to it. You have some angles that are original. And it's those to me that are connecting with most of your readers, because some of the traditional, if you will, I guess, instruction on habits can actually be debilitating. They can be demoralizing. They're hard to reach. They're in-game focused, and so thus most of us will fall short of them. And this is not you sort of put the cart before the horse here. And so, first of all, I appreciate you still being willing to talk about this. You wrote this 5 years ago, and thank you for still keeping your foot on the gas in places like this, where you are talking about content for the millionth time. But as you know how it works, I've got a ton of listeners who are going to hear from you the first time today. So this can be new to them and important to them. And so I'm grateful for your willingness to continue to invest in your message. So having said that, would you be
Yeah, of
willing
course.
to
I love
talk
talking
for
about it. It's not hard for me. I enjoy it. It's fun. And I hope
great?
people find it useful too.
Yes, perfect. I'm glad to hear you say that. Because I'd love if you would for a minute just to talk about the genesis of this particular work and what you learned and why this book sprung out of a practice that you put in place for yourself after suffering what would have been probably considered a freak accident. And so it's not that you stumbled into this content, but it was put solidly on your plate to have to assess and have to really process. Can you talk about that just a little bit, please?
So my sophomore year in high school, I had this really serious injury. I was hit in the face with a baseball bat, and it was an accident. My classmate took a swing, and the bat kind of slipped out of his hands and rotated sort of like a helicopter, kind of through the air, and then hit me right between the eyes. So it broke my nose, shattered both eye sockets, broke the bone behind my nose, kind of like deeper in your skull. It's called your ethmoid bone. Anyway, so multiple facial fractures. I sort of stumbled back down into school with the help of teacher and some classmates. I answered questions for a few minutes, but then pretty quickly lost consciousness. Um, Taken to the local hospital, started to struggle with basic functions like swallowing and breathing. Lost the ability to breathe on my own. They intubated me, kind of pumping breaths into me by hand. The doctors huddled up and decided that it was too serious for the local hospital to handle, so they needed to air care me to a larger facility. So they wheeled me out to the helipad. My mom had made it to the hospital by that point, so she got on the helicopter with me. My dad was there too, but he doubled back to get my brother and sister and kind of figure out what was going on with them. Um, we landed on the roof of this larger hospital, and I'm told that there's like this team of 10 or 20 doctors and nurses ran out, grabbed um the stretcher, the gurney, like wheeled me off and to get operated on. And I had a seizure. I had already had one. I ended up having three that day. And they decided that it was just kind of too dicey right then to undergo surgery. So they placed me into this medically induced coma. And I wouldn't wake up until the next day. And my vital signs had stabilized and they felt like they could release me from the coma. It ended up being about a week before I had surgery. But the first thing I said was when I finally came back to consciousness was, I never asked for this. And I think, it's a very natural place to go. But one of the best things that happened for me in the whole sequence of events was getting out of that mindset really quickly and becoming much more positive about it. I don't look back on it now, even though that was the first thing I said. I don't really feel like a victim through any of it all. It was just, it was a thing that happened, and like we all have bad things that happen. And I don't know, I wasn't going to dwell on it. I was just going to try to focus on how I could make some improvements each day. And if you would have come up to me at the time, I never would have had a language for it. I wouldn't have said, "Oh, I'm
Sure.
just
How
getting
old were you?
1% better today." I was
Yeah.
16.
Yeah, you're just a kid. Hmm.
I just wanted to get back on the baseball field and have normal, like summer and whatever. But I couldn't drive a car for the next 9 months. My first physical therapy session, I was practicing basic motor patterns, like walking in a straight line. It was a long road back. It was over a year before I played baseball again. And it was the time in my life when I was forced to start small. I had to just focus on having a good physical therapy session, or maybe I couldn't do much physically, but I could study for this test, or maybe I couldn't do very much with my friends, but I could focus on, some other element of life. And so I was just trying to find little wins, just something that I could look at and be like, today was a good day. And I think that mindset ended up really helping me later in life once I had moved on from the injury and made a full recovery of how can I find some win for today? How can I find something that makes today meaningful or makes today positive or makes today a victory? And if you can keep stacking days up, you'd be surprised where you end up. So I didn't really have a good high school career. I, barely played really, but I made it onto a college team. And my first year I came off the bench, and the second year I started, and third year I was team captain. And then by the time I graduated, I was academic All-American, and I had a good college career. And I don't, there was nothing like legendary about my athletic career. I never played professionally, but I do look back on it now and think, well, I fulfilled my potential. I was able to make the most of what I had with the circumstances that I have faced. And I think that's all any of us really want at some level, is just feel like I can't control everything in life. Sometimes we all face obstacles or challenges, but did I do the best that I could with what I was facing? And it feels good to be able to say that. And I think that your habits and your daily choices go a long way to what that answer is, and to how you may feel about your response to the obstacles and events that come your way. So that I wasn't writing about habits at that time, but that experience shaped a lot of my mindset about it. And then 10 years later, when I was researching and writing about habits, I was learning a lot about the science, but I also had this personal practice to fall back on. I would say that Atomic Habits kind of came out of the blend of those two things, the scientific research and the reading and insights I was trying to come across, and then out of practical experience and personal mindset and, what I had to deal with in my own life.
One of your obviously now famous approaches to habits is this 1% idea. And it's so compelling because it's absolutely accessible. You have created a framework literally anybody can hook into. You don't have to have every advantage in the world. It's not really circumstance related. In fact, it applies sometimes even more so when our circumstances are negative or challenging or we're struggling or suffering. And so I I think this is one of my favorite pieces of your work is this idea. And so can you just it's got so many tendrils, but can you just sort of touch down on this idea of 1%? Because this is my kind of deal. Like now I'm listening to what you have to say. I'm not the people who are like, I'm going to have you as a new person by the end of May. Like that's silly. That's overwhelming and dumb. So this I can get behind because it works.
A lot of the discussion about results in life, about the progress we want to make, the outcomes that we want to achieve, it is very oriented on position. What's the number in the bank account? What's the number on the scale? What's current stock price? We have all these measurements, there are all these things in life that measure our current position. And then there's kind of naturally this like judgment or analysis that comes out of that, where you feel like, oh, I haven't achieved what I said I wanted to achieve, or we're not where we want to be yet. And so you might feel guilty or judge yourself or whatever. And this focus on getting 1% better each day is really about emphasizing trajectory rather than position. The whole world is going to emphasize your position and where you're at. And what I'm trying to emphasize is say, listen, are you getting 1% better or 1% worse? Is the arrow pointed up and to the right, even if it's just a little bit, or have you flatlined? Because if you're on a good trajectory, all you need is time. All you need is patience. Time will magnify whatever you feed it. So if you have good habits, time becomes your ally. And every day that goes by, you get in a little bit of a stronger position. You just need patience. Let time work for you. But if you have bad habits, now time is your enemy. And every day that goes by, you kind of dig the hole a little bit deeper. And so it's really this emphasis on trajectory. Are you on an upwards angle or a downward angle? And this shorthand, 1% better is really shorthand for that idea. It's shorthand for trying to find some small way to be on a good path today, to be on a good trajectory today. And there are a bunch of different ways that I try to illustrate the idea and the concept. One of the examples I give in the book is, imagine you walk into a room, it's really cold. Okay. It's like 25 degrees. You can see your breath. There's this ice cube sitting on the table, and you start to crank up the thermostat, and the temperature increases 25, 26, 27, 28, ice cube is still sitting there, 29, 30, 31. And then all of a sudden you get to 32 degrees, and it's this 1 degree shift, right? It's no different than the 1 degree shifts that had come before, but suddenly you hit this phase transition and the ice cube melts. And I think real life is a lot like that. Your habits are a lot like that. Any kind of meaningful change that people have made in life, it's often the result of many small adjustments or small habits, little choices, daily actions that are often easy to dismiss. When the temperature goes from 28 to 30 degrees, the ice cube's still there. It's easy to feel like, I've been running for a month. I haven't seen a change in my body. Why am I still doing this? Or we've been meeting for 8 months on this project every week, but we still haven't shipped the feature. Like, what are we wasting our time on? And in reality, that effort is not being wasted. It's just being stored. It's like the buildup of potential energy for you to get to this phase transition and release and get the outcome that you want. And a lot of things in life and a lot of things with habits are like that. And so this concept of getting 1% better each day, or increasing the temperature 1 degree each day, it's really about trying to find some small bite-sized way, some daily action that you can latch onto and trust that if you build up that potential energy, if you keep showing up and stacking good days on top of each other, you're going to hit a phase transition. You're going to get to that point where that latent potential is released. And now all of a sudden we have the results that we all have been wishing so badly for.
That's such a generous approach to it. To not imagine that just because the result is either taking longer than somebody hopes for, or it's more complicated than they expected, that what's required here is patience and endurance. Like, keep your hand at the plow. Like, you are actually going somewhere. This is something you wrote in Atomic Habits. You said, every action you take I love this, by the way. I love this first sentence so much. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity. This is one reason why meaningful change does not require radical change. Some habits can make a meaningful difference by providing evidence of a new identity. And if a change is meaningful, it actually is big. I really, really love this. And I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about this whole idea of identity and that what kind of person we are voting for, and which comes first. Because I think a lot of us think once we hit that thing, whatever it is, once we get that thing that we want, there's my identity. I'm an overcomer. I'm whatever it is. I'm at the weight I want. I'm at the job I want. I'm got the salary I want. Fill in blank. But you've kind of got it swapped, and I find that really interesting and fascinating, compelling. Can you talk a little bit about um, this idea that we're voting for the type of person we want to become?
I think the typical way to approach this is kind of what you described, which is you start with the result that you want, which is, I should preface this before I get into all this. This is coming from someone who's very results oriented, right? Like I get it. Like I fall into the same traps that everybody else falls into. It's very easy to put the result on a pedestal and to make it all about the outcome. But usually the natural place your brain wants to go is to say, okay, I want a certain type of result. So let's say I want to lose 40 pounds. And then you come up with some kind of plan or process for that. Where you say, all right, if I'm going to lose this weight, then I need to work out 4 days a week and I need to follow this diet and so on. And the assumption is that if I'm able to do this, if I can follow through on this plan and I can achieve this result, then I'll be more like the type of person I want to be. That will somehow have transformed me into what I hope, I'll feel about myself. And my process here, what we're kind of describing, which I call identity-based habits, is to flip this on its head and to start not with the result, but by asking, who do I wish to become? Who's the type of person that I'm hoping to be? And then which habits reinforce being that kind of person? So, for example, you might say, all right, I don't know who I want to be yet, but I know that I want to lose 40 pounds. Well, okay, you can say, who is the type of person that could do that? Well, maybe it's the type of person that doesn't miss workouts. And so that starts to become part of the identity where you say, okay, my identity is I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And then the habits that reinforce that, you can see how different these two things could end up being. The person who starts with a certain number they want to hit on the scale, now they're looking at things like crash diets or really extreme workout programs, or it's really easy to talk yourself into like, I have to be working out for an hour a day because otherwise it's not going to make a difference. But the person who says, well, the thing I'm really trying to work toward is to build the identity of being the person who doesn't miss workouts. Well, now you can do one set and you cast a vote for that identity. You can show up for 5 minutes and feel good about who you are. And of course, if you ultimately want to get better results or whatever, maybe the workout needs to be larger or longer. But the point is to establish the identity, because the person who genuinely believes that about themselves, who sees themselves as an athlete or who sees themselves as I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts, it's a lot easier for that person to follow through on the behavior because it's like, no, this is just part of who I am. This is part of what I normally do. So your habits are how you embody a particular identity. Every day that you make your bed, you embody the identity of someone who's clean and organized. Or if you study biology for 20 minutes on Wednesday night, you embody the identity of someone who is studious. And we usually talk about habits as mattering because of the external results they'll get you. Hey, they'll help you lose weight or make more money or be more productive or whatever. And habits can do that stuff, and that's fine. But the real reason that habits matter is because they cast votes for your desired identity. They provide evidence for being that kind of person. And so I think that ultimately what we're trying to get to is not to achieve the outcome, but to be that person. It's not like the goal is not to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. The goal is not to read 30 books a year. The goal is to become a reader. And once you start to adopt that identity for yourself, it becomes much easier to follow through. So identity, your behavior and your beliefs are a two-way street, right? Like the things that you do influence the beliefs that you have about yourself, and the beliefs that you have, the mindset that you have also influences the choices that you make and the things that you do. But my argument, my encouragement is to let the behavior lead the way, to start with 1 minute of meditation or one sales call or one email or one push up or whatever it is, and to let that small action be evidence that in that moment you were that kind of person. And if you keep casting votes and building up evidence of that identity, pretty soon you turn around in 3 months or 6 months or a year and you have every reason to believe it because you have all this proof.
That's so good. When it comes to the mechanism of getting there, the dailiness of all of this, which is quite ordinary. It's to your earlier point, it's not that sexy. It's so when we're goal oriented, sometimes we trend toward or we're drawn to really sexy mechanisms that are quick, fast, razzle dazzle. This is actually not that. This is the dailiness of building this into our lives and into our identities. And so you talk about focusing on a system instead of focusing on the goal. And I think this is key because at one point there's the getting there. And so this is some of the machinery that you suggest. I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit. One thing that you wrote was you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. That feels really true to me. If I were being like really self-honest, and I'd like to hear you talk about that a little bit more.
No, in many areas of life, in many domains of life, the winners and the losers have the same goals. So if you have a job opening and 100 people apply, presumably every candidate has the goal of getting the job, right? Or if you look at the Olympic Games, presumably every Olympian has the goal of winning the gold medal. So the goal is clearly not the thing that determines the outcome. And if the winners and the losers have the same goals, the goal cannot be the thing that makes the difference in your performance. And so it has to be something else. So what is that? And as you said, my argument is you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So often in life, we're told you need to be more ambitious, you need to 10x your vision, think bigger, set bigger goals for yourself. But the goal is kind of the easy part. Like, I'm an author, right? So I could set a goal to sell 100 million books. Like the goal took me 3 seconds. Like the goal is not the hard part. It's building a system of behaviors, a collection of habits that lead you toward that outcome. And so this doesn't mean that goals are like useless or unimportant. Goals can be very helpful for certain things. Like they're really helpful for setting a sense of direction. So it's good for either yourself or for the whole team to know this is where we're driving. They're good for filtering. So like if opportunities come your way and you have a clear goal, you can run them through that filter and be like, does this thing help me get closer to that or not? And if no, then it's easier to decline. But once you've set your goal and kind of decided on the direction, it's best to set it on the shelf, metaphorically speaking, and spend the vast majority of your time focused on building a better system. And there's this other thing that happens with goals, which is if you get very goal oriented, you kind of get into this yo-yo pattern where, if your goal is to run a half marathon and then you train for 3 months and you do the race and then the race is over and you did your thing, you achieve the goal. Then, you take a week off and then maybe a week turns into 2 or 3, or you turn around a month or two, or maybe even 3 months later, you're like, oh, I haven't even really been running. I've run like 3 times since that race. And you realize that it was the goal that was kind of driving you forward because that's where you were so fixated on. But if you shift that to the identity-based habits, like we were talking about a minute ago, and the real objective is to be a runner or to become a runner, well, someone who's a runner, they might do the race, but they also just want to run again in a week or two because that's part of what they do and part of who they are. And so the way that I would describe this difference is goals are good for people who care about winning once. Systems are best for people who care about winning repeatedly. And if you really want to make progress again and again, if you want to stay at the top or continue to fulfill your potential, if you want to continue to make progress over a long timeline, you need some collection of habits, some system to make that a reality. I really liked the word that you used a minute ago where you said the dailiness of it. And, the goal is about this moment. The system is about this dailiness. It's about the lifestyle. It's about finding a small change, a non-threatening change, a collection of habits that leads you toward those outcomes that you want to hit or those milestones that you'd like to reach along the way. And I chose the phrase atomic habits for a couple reasons. First meaning of the word atomic is tiny or small, like an atom. And I think your habits should be small and easy. And the second reason, though, is the one that people often overlook, and it applies to what we're talking about right now. Atoms build into molecules, molecules build into compounds. It's the fundamental unit in a larger system. And your habits are the same way. It's not one habit, it's like a collection of a few of them that are all organized toward one outcome. And it's the combination of these 5 or 10 things that you're doing that are all kind of driving you forward, that build that system that carries you along each day. And then the final meaning of the word atomic is the source of immense energy or power. And I think if you put all three of those things together, you kind of see the arc of the conversation we're having, but you also see the arc of the book, which is you start with changes that are small and easy to do. So 1% better. You start with things that are digestible and simple. And then you layer them on top of each other like units in a larger system. You don't rise to your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And if you can do that well, then you end up with some really powerful and remarkable results in the long run. So I kind of see that's how these concepts are starting to like weave together.
I'm thinking about the listeners, the people listening, and particularly the type of listener who's hearing this conversation and going, this paradigm sounds like it's going to work for the type A's of the world, the go-getters, the ambitious ones, the ones who love a goal. I mean, I never met a goal I didn't love. However, impractical or impossible, I don't care. Let's reach for the damn stars. So some of us are naturally postured toward habits, changes, results, all of it. I'd like to hear what you have discovered. Because you know this deep, you knew this when you were writing this, when you were researching this, because these are science based and research based and history based. I mean, you've pulled this from a body of knowledge that has a lot of credibility to it, and so this message isn't just for those types, correct? Like this is not just for the out front, go get them, early to rise types for whom this is lower hanging fruit. We love this stuff. What have you discovered about your readers who are like, I'm lazy, I'm shy, I have too many negative messages in my head? What about these folks? How are they? What's their hook in here?
So let me say a couple things that are simultaneously true, but may seem like they're competing with each other. So the answer to your question is yes, it's for those people for sure. In some ways, it might actually be more for them than for the type A person, although I think the type A's kind of naturally gravitate to a lot of this stuff. I think one of the reasons Atomic Habits has sold so well is because it is so accessible for the group that doesn't consider themselves to be type A. And I also, I claim no expertise about ADHD or addiction or any other kind of, diseases or syndromes and so on. But I have heard from a lot of readers who have ADHD or OCD or have struggled with addiction or someone in their family does, who have also found the book really useful, which I find interesting because those are not people that usually get categorized as top performers. But the topics apply to them very cleanly. So for whatever that's worth, it seems to have some wide appeal. Now, I would say two things. The first is my view is that there is no one way to build better habits. There are many ways. And my job is not to tell you how to do it. My job is to lay all the tools out on the table. So rather than trying to tell you this is the way to build better habits, I'm trying to empower you or equip you with tools and strategies that you can choose to build better habits based on what you're facing at the time. And so if I give you a full tool belt, you can sit there and say, you know what? I think for this situation, I need the screwdriver, or I think this time I need the wrench or whatever. And my job is not to tell you what to do, but just to equip you to be able to do it. And then the second thing is that there is always some level of willingness or eagerness that is going to be necessary for you to add to the mix with the ideas, right? Like, I can't make anybody do anything. I'm not really even interested. Like one of the little secrets about Atomic Habits that most people don't bring up is or notice is the book actually never tells you which habits to build, which is kind of interesting. Sometimes I'll do interviews and people are like, "What are 5 habits everybody should build?" And I'm like, "That's like it's not covered anywhere in the book." Because yeah, like it's just not my style. Like I don't think it's my place to tell you what habits you should build in your life, and I'm not even really interested. Like my job is to try to give you tools that you need so that you can choose what habits you want to build in your life. And that's one of the things that make habits great is that they're very personal. Like your habits are your habits, not mine, and everybody has their own little set. So, anyway, the book is not meant to be prescriptive. It's meant to be empowering. And My hope is that anybody, no matter where you're at in life or what you consider your strengths or weaknesses to be, can find some value in having a broader tool set.
Mhm. I like that for a lot of reasons. 4 years ago, I went through a really shocking and surprising divorce after being married my entire adult life. So it wasn't something I saw coming, and it just leveled everything. Everything was just nuclear, and it was just scorched earth. And trying to emerge out of it was just absolutely unknown territory to me. I did not know how to rebuild a life. I could not, hadn't been single since I was 19 years old. So I didn't even know how to be an adult by myself. Um, and I remember in the earliest days of recovery when I'm not even thinking about how to keep my career going. I'm just thinking, how can I get through the day? Like how do we just what's a path into just maybe sleeping again at night? I remember I started because, again, to your earlier point, habits are up to the person, and it depends on what you're facing, and it depends on what you're trying to rebuild or where you're trying to go. And for me at the time, it was simply basic recovery. So I'm like, here's what I can do every day. I can't solve any of this. This is all just so just screwed. But what I can do is I can get up in the morning, I'll make my bed. I'll be a person who makes my bed. Just that alone. This I have a room with a made bed and pillows on that feels amazing. And I told myself, okay, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna wash my face before I go to bed. Woo, mind bending, I know. But for some reason, washing my face at night and making my bed in the morning, I just said, I literally don't know what else to do except for these two things. I'll do these every day. I'm telling you, they strung together a possibility for me that started snowballing as I was like, well, if I can do this every day, maybe I can figure out taxes. Maybe I can figure out how to be in charge of my own like financial well-being. And it's true. It's so crazy. They're very powerful. It does not feel very exciting to tell somebody to wash their face every night before they go to bed. But night after week after week, what it did is it sent me a message about my own self. And the message was, you can do this. You're a person who can do this. You're a person who can keep your word to yourself. You're a person that can build a habit that's meaningful, even though it's small and a little silly. And that's really the fundamental notion that you are presenting to us, which is in these things, we build the kind of person we want to be. People love it because it's true. And so I'd love to hear from you because you're the guru here. Always, you're teaching this all the time, but I'd love to hear what is a set of habits, perhaps, that you employed in your own life in a certain area where you thought, I want this to look differently than it does. I'd like to be the kind of person who, I don't know, fill in the blank. And I'd love to hear if you applied your own good sense to your life and discovered meaningful change.
Sure. So before I answer that, just a comment on what you just said and shared, which thank you for doing that. I've come across a lot of stories kind of like this, which is there's this upward spiral, there's this positive momentum that these small habits can have. One of the best feelings for the human mind is the feeling of progress. And that's true even if progress is small. And so you want to find some little way to, get a win or feel like, you're moving forward. I heard from some people who like this one woman, once she finally started budgeting, getting her finances in order, that like somehow spiraled into a bunch of areas of her life. She felt like working out more and she felt like doing all this other stuff. And it's like the energy starts bleeding into other areas. I think this is an important thing to keep in mind if you're listening to this and thinking about it's very easy once you're listening to a conversation about habits or thinking about your own habits to bite off more than you can chew or to start getting pulled in like 10 directions, be like, oh, I'm going to change all 10 of these things. But I think one good thing to remind yourself of is this energy will naturally extend into other areas of your life. So maybe pick one of those 10 things and try to really master that. Like, what's the one that feels accessible? What's the one that feels maybe even it's like upstream of other good things happening? Like one for me is if I get my daily workout in, for some reason, that's the thing that kind of like makes the rest of the day like cascade in a level. And so I really don't need to worry about the other stuff as much. I just need to do that kind of one linchpin thing. And if I get that habit in, the rest of the day tends to go smoothly. And I bet if you're listening to this and you can ask yourself that question, what am I doing? What habits am I following when my day goes really well? There are probably two or three things that kind of naturally bubble up for you. And I would say maybe that one of those is the area to start. Like, you can get to the other nine things later, but maybe one of those is the area to start building some momentum and feel like you can move forward. Um, but I love your example of scaling it down and making it, something small, but turned out to actually be something.
It does. And you're
Um,
right. It's a trickle down effect. Truly, even if it is the smallest thing. I just needed something I could do. I couldn't have a big one. It needed to be little.
sure. So I'm always working on habits and, like everybody else, I struggle with all the same things, everybody else will struggle with. So one of the funny things about writing a book about habits is that people kind of assume you have your habits dialed in. But I I sent this message to my publisher when I was writing Tomic Habits. I was struggling through these drafts. And I was complaining to her about how writing this book is kind of wrecking all of my habits. And she responded and she said something really smart, which is she was like, "We write the books we need," and that really resonated with me. I mean, the reason I have an interest in this topic is because I have dealt with all these same problems. Do I procrastinate? Sure, all the time. Do I focus too much on the goal and not enough on the system? Yes, of course. Like at some level, everything we talk about today is a reminder to myself to try to pull myself back to center. Um, I'll give you one that I have made some progress on recently. So for whatever reason, I have always liked working out. Maybe it was being an athlete or whatever. Like I like that one. That's an easy health habit for me to get into. But I've always hated any kind of nutrition, diet, tracking, calorie counting, whatever. Like I haven't been interested. And I could get away with it when I was younger, but then as you get older, kids, and life gets crazy and whatever, it just gets harder. And so I tried a lot of the normal things people would try. Like I downloaded MyFitnessPal and used that. I didn't even use it for a day. I used it for one meal. And then I was like, this is a pain in the ass. There's no way I'm going to do this. Anyway, I tried that. I tried a couple other things, whatever. So fast forward, I've been kind of like starting and stopping on this habit for like 2 or 3 years. And eventually the thing that stuck was I hired a trainer, and once a week he sends me an email. Um, and I know that he's going to be checking in. So that's one part of it. And then the second thing, I got how most people, if you go into your closet and you're like, there are probably 20% of your clothes that you wear like 80% of the time. Like there's few things that you're like are your staples, and like the core of your wardrobe. Most people's diet is kind of like that too. So once I got like the 20 meals that cover like most of my eating into the spreadsheet, I could just copy and paste them in whenever I ate them, and it became way easier to track. And so for some reason, that combination of the spreadsheet with my common meals on it and the coach checking in once a week was enough for me to actually follow through and track the calories. So I think there are a couple lessons here. The first is it's not that I didn't know the strategies, right? I wrote a book about the topic. It's not like I didn't know what to do. But there needs to be some willingness to experiment with your habits. If you're expecting for the first strategy that you pick to be the one that's going to work perfectly for you, it's unlikely that out of all the strategies you could follow, that the first one you pick is going to be the perfect fit. So don't get down on yourself about it. Like there's no reason. A lot of people will start a new habit and then the strategy doesn't work or the plan doesn't totally fall through. And they use that as a reason to like destroy themselves. They'll be like, oh, see, this always happens, or I knew I wasn't going to be able to fall. This is the kind of thing that I always do. I knew this wasn't going to work. Why did I bother trying? And my response is like, why does it need to be like that? Like we don't have to turn it into an entire evaluation of your self-worth. It's just a strategy that you tried that didn't happen to be the right fit. So let's try a different one. And that was true for me, just as it's true for everybody else. So I think that's just one example. And I don't really think that the actual specifics of the example matter. It's more about the attitude and the approach and the willing to try new things, and to also have enough perseverance to have tried for 2 or 3 years and to not have it work out and to start and stop and go through all those normal things that everybody does with their habits, but to not give up on it. And it's, there's this common advice that like if something doesn't work, you should try again. And I think actually the better advice is if something doesn't work, you should try differently. It's not about giving up, it's about trying a new line of attack. And if you can take that mindset to your problems, you'll often be able to find a version that works for you.
Okay, last question. And I just have to ask because it's the success of Atomic Habits is so extraordinary. It's so rare. I mean, this is the rarest air, of course. This is not normal. You're not having a normal experience with any given book that hits the shelves of Barnes and Noble. Um, so, from these last 5 years, where this just went like stratospheric, what's the coolest thing that you've gotten to do with the message of this book? Like the coolest room you got to stand in, or the people you got to speak to, or a conversation you got to have. I have no idea. I don't know what happens when you sell millions and millions and millions of one book. So if you're looking back over the last 5 years and all that this book has created for you, just as a person, because you're just a dude. I mean, yes, you wrote an amazing book that has helped millions and millions of people, but also you're a guy living a real life. And so what would you say is like, man, this was a moment that I did not see coming?
It's all been amazing. There are some things that stand out as I'm like listening to you ask this question. I continue to be surprised by how many doors a book can open.
Ah,
Like things that have nothing to do with even the topic or whatever. It's
mm,
unbelievable how far it can spread. And the interesting thing in my case is that a lot of these ideas I covered on jamesclear.com for years before I published the book. And so like there are some blog post versions of certain ideas or whatever that I would say the book is probably like 90% new material, but some of it was out there. And there's something about packaging it into the format of a book that is more spreadable. It's more durable. The ideas tend to last. And so that's just been interesting to see. Like I'll see somebody in India reading the book and I'm like, man, like this was just like an idea in my head 6 years ago, and it was like a blog post. And then now somebody in India is, which is, yeah, it is. There's something about the scale and the reach of it that's very surprising. Um, there have been some really cool travel experiences. I did a speaking tour in Australia. That was fun. I love Australia, New Zealand, so it was really cool to go there. Um, I, I spoke in Dubai, I spoke in Kuala Lumpur and with Singapore. Like there's just a bunch of places that I probably wouldn't have gone if it hadn't pulled me there. Um, so that's been really cool. Um, Sports teams are always fun, like JJ Watt tweeted about the book, or I spoke to the Cleveland Indians, or I went over to London and spoke at a rugby stadium. Like those are, I don't know, they're just kind of cool to have access to some of that stuff. Um, but the one idea that popped in my head, the story that came up while you were asking this question is there's a buddy of mine, his name's Ryan, and we played baseball together when we were 12 years old. And I haven't talked to him basically since we were like 13. We were just on that team together. And we went off and lived our lives and he got married and had kids. And um, he sent me this message earlier this year. He had like gotten out of shape and his life was, I don't know, whatever. He was like just kind of on a trajectory he didn't want to be on. And for some reason, reading the book was the thing that like kickstarted it for him. And he sent me these before and after pictures and he lost all this weight and he's like feeling so good about his life. And this is a guy, it's just a friend that lives like 10 minutes from my parents, like and that there are a lot of readers who have stories like that. And that's the coolest part. That's the best. And um yeah, I don't know. It just there's an interesting thing about being an entrepreneur and a writer and just putting your work out into the world, whether it's writing or something else, which is sometimes when you work up the courage to publish something, every creator is worried about how it's going to go. You're worried about how it's going to be received. And sometimes the people that you hope will support you most disappoint you a little bit. Sometimes they will outright criticize you, but most of the time it's not that. Most of the time it's just maybe they didn't care as much as you hoped they would care. And that can sting a little bit, but you'll also be surprised by the people who will care in your life or who you were acquaintances with or had a friendship with at some point or worked with at some point, that it really matters to them and they get it. And that I think when you have the unexpected disappointments from the people that you were hoping to hear from, you should feel the unexpected surprises just as strongly from the people that you weren't expecting to feel from, to hear from. And it's been those unexpected surprises, the people that were part of my life at one season or another and came back into it because of the book, or who found value in it for one reason or another, or the people I went to high school with who are teachers now that share it with their students, or it's just like all little stories like that that matter a lot and make me feel like the effort was worth it, because all I really wanted was to write something that could make a contribution or could, feel like I was being useful and adding my little bits to society. And it's all those little stories that make me feel like, yeah, that happened.
Yeah. Well, you've done it, James. You've done it. You've contributed. It is mattering. It continues to matter. It's going to continue to matter. What does that mean for you as you look on the next thing you want to create? What are you working on?
That's a good question. Honestly, right now I'm just working on building a great family. I have really young kids, and I am focused mostly on them right now, and it's great. It's the best. Like I have no regrets for that. Um, I have noticed that me as a person, one thing that really fills me up and that I like is creating something new. So that could be creating a business, it could be creating a book. My little creative practice right now is writing 321, my newsletter each week. So that's part of it. But as long as I'm creating, I'm happy. And so I think there's what I need, which is creating something new. There's what the family needs for me. And then there's also like, how can I make a bigger impact in the world? And I think I'm focused primarily on the first two right now. And I have some ideas for what should come next in terms of writing another book or launching another project. But the time will come for that. The season where your kids are really young is short. And um, yeah, it's precious, and I want to be there for it. So I'm focused
How
on
old
that
are
right
your
now.
kids?
They're 1 and 3.
Oh, you're in the weeds. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I see now. I know your life. I see where you're at. Uh-huh. We're bedtime, bath time, diapers, like cut the grapes in quarters. I got it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I've quartered a lot of grapes.
I know you have. I know I have 5 kids. I've done my time. So and it is over in a half a second. I'm so happy that you know that. Because when my kids were your kids' ages, I remember thinking, well, I guess this is where we're all going to die. I don't think we're ever going to emerge from early childhood, and this is just it
I
for
looked
me.
at
So
my
I had a
wife the
good
other day and I
run.
said, I think
Uh-huh.
we just won't be able to do things anymore. Like, I think that's just
Totally.
where we're at. Like
That's it.
we can't go places. We can't go
No,
out to eat. We can't see people. Like
that's
I think
it.
that's just where we're at.
You're like,
But
we had our memories. Like, we'll just remember when we were people who did things. And I don't know. It's so true. I will tell you, as somebody who has done all this and whose youngest is now a senior in high school, you get there. And all of a sudden you're like, where'd it go? So I commend you for saying these little tiny years right here are really small. And so even if your creative endeavors come down a little bit lower to the ground for a while, they'll have plenty of time to like get more wind in their sails and launch again. So
yeah, I had a guy stop over the other day. His son's a freshman in college now. And he was like, we were talking about my kids, and he was like, I would give anything to go back. And just hearing him say that, like almost makes you want to cry in the moment, but it makes you appreciate the season that you're in. And like the other seasons will be great too, but they're different in their own way. He's like, my son came home from spring break and we're like, all right, are you ready to go back? Like it's not the same. So it'll be great, but it'll be different. I'm just trying to appreciate
that's
this.
right. That's right. My oldest son is 26 today, and he was just born. So it really is like that. But let me be one of many voices who will tell you, you will love the big kid years. You will love it as they get older. It is so fun. Teenagers are fun. Young adults are the best. So do not worry that these are your best days and they're about to be over. It just gets better. It really does. Thanks for coming on today. I loved this conversation. I'm fascinated by your work. It's been so useful to me, even as I cannot knock you off that number one spot, no matter how hard I try. Um, Fine, I will give it to you. Atomic Habits deserves it. Fine, universe. Um, but just delighted to have you and excited to send all my listening community like straight to your website and straight to your book. And
Thank you so
so
much. I
appreciate your
appreciate
time
the
today.
conversation. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been great to chat. And if I can, I just have one more thought I want to add,
I'd
which
love to
is
hear it.
this came up at a point early in the conversation. I forgot to mention it, and I think it's a nice way to summarize what we've covered, which is in a lot of ways, I feel like the two time frames in life that matter most are 10 years and 1 hour. And what I mean is like 10 years is shorthand for pretty much think about any big, meaningful project in your life. They're almost always multi-year things, like getting in the best shape of your life, raising a family that you're proud of, launching a book, building a business, whatever it is. It's a big thing. And it's important to think about those things and what you want them to be for your life and what you'd like those big 10-year visions to be, because you don't get many of them. Like if you're lucky, maybe you live 80 or 90 years, and for some of that you're young, and maybe for some of it your health is kind of fading. So maybe you get 5 or 6 things like that in your life, but take some time to think about what that is and then scale it down to 1 hour. What can you do in the next hour that moves you toward that 10-year vision? How can you live a good moment or a good hour today that takes you closer to that thing that you're ultimately hoping to get to? And I think if you can simultaneously hold those two mindsets of 10 years and 1 hour, then you're in a good position to think long term and be patient, but to also act short term and to not let the days pass you by when you have the chance to make something of it. So, thanks to anybody who's been listening. Appreciate you guys sharing me, and yeah, thanks to you as well for a great conversation.
That's the perfect thesis. All right, James, we're all cheering for you. Thanks for leading us so well. I'm so proud of you. You're just doing such an amazing job. Enjoy those littles. Enjoy putting them back in bed like 15 times before they finally stay. Eventually, you will wake them up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I promise you this will happen to you. So do your time. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
All right, you guys. I love that conversation. I love that conversation because it's for every single one of us, no matter where we're at, who we are, what our personality type is, what we're facing, what we're struggling to overcome, where we want to go. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like he said, he didn't write a template. This isn't a formula. He didn't say, here are the 5 steps. You don't get any of that. It's simply, here is what you can build into your mind, into your heart, and into your ordinary days, to honor and become the person that you are in there. I just love it. I love that so much. I love not having a system that is handed to me. This is the way to do it, because he was right. There is no one way to do anything. That's such a wisdom to offer us as readers. So anyway, if you're the last remaining person who has not read Atomic Habits, if you go over to the jenhatmaker.com under the podcast tab, I'll have this whole everything, you guys. I'll have this episode. I will have the show notes. I will have links to all of James' awesome things, including his newsletter that he writes every single week. He's got a huge email list, and why wouldn't you want to be on it? And that's a great place to share this particular episode. This episode is for anybody that you love, who they are wanting to move towards something that feels meaningful to them. Anybody, whatever that is, a health goal, a career goal, a big change in their life, some big adventure. This is their episode. So thanks for sharing. We love when you do that. More to come in the Change series. It's this fire hot, the whole entire thing. So if you've missed any of it, make sure that you are subscribing to the podcast, and you will get every single episode queued up for you and ready to go. And you can do that wherever you listen to podcasts. And per usual, if you ever want to watch one of our interviews, we video all of them, and they're over on my YouTube channel. So you can watch any conversation you'd love to be a part of like that. All right, you guys. Thank you for being here, and more to come, and see you next week.